Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the second installment of Unplanned. This week, my guest is Gerry Post. So if you just want to kind of tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm a retired and reformed planner, I think. And I've had a pretty interesting sort of life and career. When I grew up as a kid, it was a clear career path for me, which wasn't planning, it was business. And all that changed in the late 60s. I immigrated to Canada and got involved in the civil rights movement and a big sort of civic project in Toronto that was proposed called the Spadina Expressway. And went to some meetings and protests, and through that met Jane Jacobs. We developed a bit of a relationship, and she suggested I sort of change my course of study, which I did. And so I learned an awful lot, and then came to Nova Scotia, and of course things are very quiet here. It was a completely different environment. So I've been involved in planning, and then somehow got involved in international development and did some interesting work around the world. Wasn't feeling so well one day. Went to see a doctor. He says, look, I don't know what it is, but best to go back to Canada, which I did. You know, my condition was very, very bad. I needed to operate immediately. It's a heart condition. When I woke up, I think I'm still alive, but I was paralyzed from the waist down, and then saw all the barriers that you face with that. And when I was in planning school, there was zero discussion about accessibility back in the early 70s. And just threw myself into advocacy, even while in hospital. Got involved with the province at the time when I was in hospital. They announced that the Liberal Party in the election campaign that was going on at the time, that they were going to develop an Accessibility Act. Became part of the Accessibility Committee of HRM, was their vice chair for a while, and then got involved in the whole thing provincially because of the act, and basically brought together the whole community, because there's about 50 organizations out there supporting persons with disabilities. And I thought it's important to have one voice. So we developed that through what we called the Bill 59 Alliance, and then asked to be involved in drafting the legislation, which they never do. That's a backroom activity. But for the first time in the history of the province, that they allow us in to help them actually draft legislation that was meant for us. And we developed a whole document to give to the province. So in the end, I think the community had more expertise than the government did in this case. And at the same time, in parallel with that, there was a group of us that had challenged the government on accessible restaurants. We're in the public health regulation. There's a requirement that if you're a restaurant, you have to have an accessible bathroom. It's right in the legislation, but they're not enforcing it. So we went to the Human Rights Commission. They told us that it was frivolous. So we took them to court. Won the court case hands down. We worked with the restaurants and the business community and others. Today it's a problem, like for example, the patios. Well, very few patios are accessible. They are now allowing dogs, so dogs have better access than disabled people to patios. So we got to change that. I read the plan, reviewed it. It's pretty good. I think I could have been bolder, but as a start, it's a good plan. And it covers not just built environment, it covers everything, including employment and things like communication. So I'm pretty proud of what's happened in Nova Scotia, and that's thanks to community. I don't think it's political. So I think we're pretty good with council. I think they really get it. Mm-hmm. And in part, as well, it's the numbers. 30.4% of our population has at least one form of a disability, right? So I think still within the general community, there's still a lack of awareness of those limitations that we have. And no doubt, the business community, whenever they need to spend additional monies on something, they're going to be, complaining about that. But at the end of the day, it's a human right. And that has to be reflected in all the planning policies. Like, I was quite disappointed with Halifax. Like, I love the idea of the backyard suites to be meant for, aging in place. But there was no requirement to make those units accessible. And that was just a matter of convenience for the council to move ahead with this thing. But it left, a percentage of people behind. Well, first of all, like, universal design is not just for the built environment, right? It can be for anything. And it's, from my perspective, it's very simple. Is to ensure that you design for everybody and leave no one behind. So, and that design thinking is, as I say, it's not just in, whether the door needs to be 36 inches or 30 inches wide. It's also building websites, building technology. So there are these things embedded in policies and protocols and procedures and that's why this whole concept of universal design goes into that whole environment as well. The environment of how you develop a policy, how you develop legislation, how you develop regulations, and all those things that go with it. People don't realize that 82% of the deaths in Canada were people with disabilities living in long-term care facilities. And a lot of them probably could be home with proper, home care support. But their homes need to be designed so that they can age in place. But the other thing, though, there's some really positive things that come out of it too. For example, the whole thing of now being able to go see your doctor online. That had been proposed like over a decade ago. Well, that came through in a matter of weeks with the pandemic. And hopefully it'll stay on and it will benefit everybody. But it's indicated too what the weaknesses in the system are. This, working from home could help a lot of people enter the workforce. People with high anxiety, people with autism who have trouble because of the ambient noise around them. So there's a lot of opportunities there. Well, first of all, most persons with disabilities don't use cars. They rely on transit or taxis or what have you. And that's one of the things we did. There is now an accessible car share, but there is a need for more accessible taxis in the city for the tourism sector. Like you don't have access to access a bus if you're a visitor, because you got to be an HRM resident, and you got to book 7 days in advance. Just crazy. Well, the barriers are the same. It's just that they're more spread out in rural areas, so they're more difficult to address. For example, transit, right? Accessible transit. It's being delivered, but not the extent it could in rural areas. Then it's an issue of geography, essentially. So yeah, rural areas are big, of course, and there are no sidewalks in rural areas in general. So if you just want to get out for a stroll in your wheelchair, forget it, it's too dangerous. So universal design is really thinking about everybody and being trained in that. And that's why I'm so pleased to see the Rick Hansen Foundation Accessibility Certification Program now being offered at Dalhousie. But that's just focuses primarily on the built environment. So it depends an awful lot on what discipline you're in, right? And there are lots of resources available online and elsewhere, and lots of webinars now in this whole subject. And like most planners go into the planning fields because they have social justice in them. But as well as when you're a young planner and you're actually working in the fields, right, is don't be afraid to be an advocate, right? So rather than stay silent when you see something that's a little bit intimidating to speak up against, your boss, like be vocal and people respect that. Like from my experience, I think that's why the people that hired me like me, because I speak up.
Thank you so much for speaking with me today. It's been a pleasure. And you're on Twitter, right?
It's at Gerry Post, all one word. Same on Facebook. And so contact me if you got any further questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again. And hopefully we'll maybe be in touch soon. Another PLANned Facts collaboration or another chat sometime. All right, bye, Gerry.
Yeah, exactly. Bye.